Welcome to In the Spotlight. I'm Abigail Pogrebin. My guest today is Jonathan Freedland. He is a British journalist who writes a weekly column for The Guardian and presents the BBC Radio 4 contemporary history series, The Long View. He also hosts the podcast Politics Weekly America for The Guardian, and he co-hosts the podcast I Never Miss. It's called Unholy, on the News with Yonit Levy. Freedland has published 12 books, 3 nonfiction works under his own name, and 9 novels, 8 of them under the pseudonym Sam Bourne. Freedland is also the writer of a stage play, Jews in Their Own Words, performed at the Royal Court Theatre. His most recent book, which we're going to talk about today, is The Traitors Circle, the true story of a secret resistance network in Nazi Germany and the spy who betrayed them. Welcome to the broadcast. Jonathan, this is a page-turner.
Oh, thank you.
I mean it. And my audience knows I don't always say that. It's chilling and it's riveting, and I can't believe it is nonfiction.
Yeah, but it is. It's a true, wholly true story. Every word you read in it, even the things that people say to each other, none of it's imagined. But I've tried to write it as if it was a novel, a thriller really, even a mystery, kind of whodunit. Because it tells the story of these 10 people, Germans, who were aristocratic. They're from the top drawer of German society.
I mean, we had countesses and tell us some of the kind of
well, yeah, there was.
aristocracy.
I mean, there isn't just one countess in this story. There are 2. There's an ambassador's widow. There is a former consul general to New York in there. There is a senior treasury official. But otherwise, there's lords and ladies, people with country estates. This is the world of white-tie dinners, nights at the opera. These are these people.
Non-Jews.
Non-Jews. There's one who has a very tenuous Jewish link, but otherwise these are non-Jewish, aristocratic, elite Germans who have one thing in common, which is they are all defying or resisting the Nazi regime. And they gathered on the 10th of September 1943 around a table for a tea party. They believed they were going to be talking about Germany without Hitler, looking forward to that future. They believed they were among their own, that they were with kindred spirits, and what they did not know is that one person sitting around that table would betray all the rest to the Gestapo. And that's what happened.
It's incredible. And you start the book, and I won't give it all away, but just the roundup of each one of them. And is it the SS at that point?
Yeah, it's SS and Gestapo who
coming
knock on the door.
Yeah, knock on the door, knowing that someone gave them away, each and every one of them. It's chilling to read. Let's just back up to why this. You've written 14 books, am I right?
That's right.
Yes, I think your laziness is dispiriting. Just why this subject, how you stumbled on it, just as a journalist.
Well, I did stumble on it. It was when I was researching my last book, which was called The Escape Artist, about the man who broke out of Auschwitz to warn the world. It's a biography
Wonderful
of Rudolf.
Book.
Thank you very much. Of Rudolf Verber, who was as a 19-year-old inmate of Auschwitz, broke out to reveal to people what was happening in Auschwitz. A truly extraordinary story. And in the course of that work, I was reading a speech by Heinrich Himmler, then head of the SS, effectively the number 2 in Nazi Germany. In 1944, in August, he's addressing the top SS brass, the Gauleiters of the SS, and he's essentially there to reassure them. It's weeks after the failed plot to assassinate Hitler, the famous Valkyrie plot. People will have seen the movie with a slightly miscast Tom Cruise. And that was on July the 20th. In August, Heinrich Himmler is addressing the SS, says, essentially, things are not unraveling, they're not out of control, we've got this. For example, he said, that reactionary cabal who are prattling over tea with the ambassador and the diplomat and the countess, we've got them all now. And I thought, tea? What, maybe it's because I'm English. I thought, what is that? And I looked into it and found this story of this tea party attended by these very sort of upper crust people who were indeed, conspiring, as it were, against the regime, and who had fallen into the hands of the SS and the Gestapo because of this mole, this betrayer from inside.
And what did they think they could do when they were conspiring? What power did they feel like they had to actually change things at all?
Well, one of the impressions I think I always had of resistance was, in Germany particularly, first of all, I think we didn't think there was much of it. But the other thing was, I think that we imagine it's either plotting to kill Hitler or it's nothing. that those are the only two options. You're either trying to get rid of the Führer or it doesn't count. But there was a whole lot of things that people could do and did do. The most obvious is several of the people around that table having tea had hidden Jews in their own homes and were even hiding them then. It was a revelation to me to realize that in the capital city of the Nazi Empire, during the peak period of the Holocaust, there were about 1,500 Jews clinging to life in hiding, in secret, in the base of the Nazi Empire in Berlin. And that meant they had to be hidden. And at least 3 of 4 of the people in this story did do that. And there's one who actually turns her home into a kind of unofficial refuge.
Can you just say a little bit about that? It's just amazing.
She's an amazing character. So she's one of those 2 countesses, Maria. She's, by the time of the Tea Party, she's about 34. She is a rebel. I mean, she's absolutely blue-blooded aristocratic lineage, but she kicks against it in all kinds of ways. They don't want her to be a vet. She becomes a vet. You know, one of the things they say is you must never ever marry a Jew. So of course she has a Jewish first husband and then later a Jewish lover, and that lover is one of the people who is in hiding in her apartment, incredibly. And they have this arrangement where should the Gestapo ever knock on the door, he will hide in this secret cavity under a bed. And well, as you'll read when you hear the story, that moment does eventually come.
And then you talk about also, sometimes people don't realize what it took. First of all, how perilous it was, as you say, to be sort of in the epicenter, but also just the curtains, letting any movement, like when you were hiding someone.
Oh, yes. So they were known as submarines, the Jews in hiding. Why submarines? Because they had to be beneath the surface, they had to be hidden, and they had to be silent. And so it meant that when she, Maria, the Countess, would head out to do a day's work, which she had to do, she would say to the Jews hiding in her home, no speaking, no whispering, because the neighbors will be listening out. You can never use the stove because any smoke that comes out of the chimney, they'll know someone's home. You cannot flush the toilet, they'll hear that. You have to be invisible and silent like a submarine. And that extended even to Hans, her own secret lover. The strictures were so tight because there was an atmosphere of deep paranoia in the Germany of that time. Again, I'm not sure how much we all know about Germany in wartime. We think, especially as Jews, I think a lot about the Germans during the war in Poland or in starving death camps. What was it like in Berlin? And one of the things that comes through is the extent to which it was an atmosphere of deep paranoia, everyone surveilling everyone else. And so one of the things
Not knowing who to trust.
Not knowing who to trust, even within own families. There's one character in this book who admits at some point she cannot voice her true feelings about the Nazis, even in front of her own husband, because you never know.
Wow.
And that's the atmosphere. And one of the things, again, I didn't know, was that the accusation would often be made by someone who themselves had been accused. So if I accused you of hiding Jews in your home, your next move is to accuse person over there of hiding Jews in their home to get you off the hook.
Wow.
So this was what it was like. It was betraying and informing and spying. Again, I think a lot of people associate that with East Germany and the Stasi. I think we haven't realized the extent to which inside Nazi Germany this was daily life.
And so I know it's hard to say one commonality they all shared, but did you see, this took great courage and it was in a way almost suicidal what they were doing. What did they share in common that drove them?
You're absolutely right about the suicidal. I mean, the risk of it was so great. And what drew me to these characters in a way was that their lives would have been fine. They would have been unscathed. They would have continued in their country estates and their restaurants where they were having lobster and champagne. It would have been fine for them. That's what makes it so intriguing, because they chose to risk everything when they really had nothing to gain and everything to lose. So they're fascinating in that way. In terms of common traits, and I think, by the way, this is a question that all of us are fascinated by, because we always do ask ourselves, don't we? When we look at this period, we say, what would I have done? And we, I think, assume and want to assume that we would have been on the right side, on the side of resistance. A common thread they have is that they believe in some authority higher than the Gestapo man pounding on the door, higher even than Adolf Hitler. That's the only thing that can give you...
Meaning God?
Well, there are two different kinds of sources of authority, in this group at least. For some, it's their own aristocratic class, that they believe we are from a Protestant nobility that has been here for 1,000 years and will be here for another 1,000 years. And you, Adolf Hitler, you're an upstart who has come, but you'll go. Whereas my castle will be here in 500 years. That, if you think that, it enables you to sort of face down the Gestapo man who comes to the house, and several of these characters, in amazing moments of drama, face those people down. But the second source of authority, as you've absolutely rightly hinted, are people who are religiously committed. And there are several deeply faithful Christians in this story who believed that, you know, when the SS man is about to cart them off, they are not as frightened as, in a way, you should be, because they're thinking, I am not going to be held accountable only to you. I will ultimately have to answer to Jesus, as they see it, to God. That's who will truly judge me, and I will do what is right by that, rather than what you, the Nazi Party, are telling me to do.
So what I'm not hearing is that they disdain or condemn anti-Semitism per se.
Several of them do. They think it's barbaric and crude, that they think it's un-German. These characters were motivated above all, I think, by a kind of patriotism. They were big believers in Germany, in a better Germany, the Germany that either had existed in the past or that could exist in the future. They regarded the persecution of the Jews as an affront, as a kind of insult to that image of Germany, that they saw Germany as obliged to be protective of, compassionate towards its minorities. It didn't mean that they particularly loved Jews, but they just felt that their patrician duty was to look after those who were, even in this case, perhaps a despised minority. That you're, as a German of aristocratic standing, it was incumbent upon you to treat that person with some dignity. So I don't think it would be a mistake to think of them as sort of Philo-Semites, or to imagine anachronistically that these were, you know, anti-racists in the language we would use now. They weren't. They were German social conservative nationalists and patriots. A couple of them were sort of social democrats, but they just saw the persecution, and particularly the violent persecution of the Jews, as a debasement of a civilized country.
How did you actually do your research? How did you begin to dig up, as particularly there's a lot of characters here?
It's an ensemble piece, really,
yeah.
And luckily for me, I think they are just wonderful characters.
Yeah,
they're all so different. You know, whether it's the pioneering head mistress or it's the former consul general here in New York, among these characters. What I discovered is, in that period, and this is one reason why writers keep going back to this period, besides the kind of intense moral clarity of the Second World War, people wrote things down. And, you know, it's one of the stereotypes about Germany and Nazi Germany that everything was recorded, but really it was. So there are transcripts, including of post-war court actions that did happen. It will become clear in the book why that happened. There were diaries, there were letters, there were sort of family biographies. A couple of these characters, even when they were in jail, as you can imagine, after the betrayal, some of them ended up in prison, who wrote a kind of prison autobiography, a prison memoir. All of that was there, waiting to be picked up. And what astonishes me is no one had yet done that.
How do you explain that?
There has never been a book on this, including in German or in Germany.
Wow.
My explanation for it, a little bit, is that in Germany, I think there has been, particularly in the last sort of 30 or 40 years, a sense that really their national collective obligation is to pay attention to the crimes of Nazi Germany, to atone for those, to reckon with those. And I think there has been a sense that if you look at the handful who stood out and rebelled, you are in some ways trying to let yourselves off the hook, that it's displacement activity. In the way perhaps that in America, if somebody was to write a book about the good plantation owner, that person would be denounced for trying to play down slavery. In this case, I don't think there was much appetite to look at these very posh, well-to-do Germans who did the right thing. But I think perhaps now enough time has passed, for us to pay attention to their story, because in some ways it's the sheer privilege they had, the fact that they would have been insulated from the ravages of the Nazi era, that makes their heroism all the more admirable. These people, as I said, had nothing to gain and everything to lose. And
you talked about how they were the very significant minority. I think you said in one interview there were 65 million German citizens in 1933. And that means the vast majority, more than 95%, did as they were told. So this was based on an estimate by an Allied investigator, a man who was German-born, who then re-entered Germany with the American forces in 1945. He estimated that some 3 million Germans had been detained, arrested, jailed, and worse, for crimes of dissent, perhaps no more than a critical remark, in the 12 years of the Third Reich. Now, I look at that figure and think that's astonishing. There's 3 million people who did what these people did in the book, who stood out, who refused to fall in line. But then you take a step back and think the number of citizens of Germany at the time, 65 million, it does mean that, yes, 3 million people, but they accounted only for 5%, 95% did as they were told, raised their right arm in the Hitler salute. So you can go either way with it. You can either be, heartened by the fact that 3 million didn't, or dispirited by the fact that 65 million And
did.
where do you fall?
Well, I think I hold both. I'm very determined to hold both. I mention in the book opens, in fact, with an admission that in even looking at this, I am in some ways making a break from my own upbringing, because I grew up in a house where nothing German was allowed.
That was my house too, by the way.
Yeah, and more people I encounter say the same.
Yeah.
That my mother had imposed a kind of boycott. There were no Siemens dishwashers, there were no Volkswagen cars outside. Nothing German would be allowed. Why? Because my own mother, and I make this point in the book, she was not a Holocaust survivor. It's important to be clear about that. But I write in the book that she had felt the breath of the Shoah upon her neck. And I say that because my mother's mother was killed in the very last V-2 rocket to fall on London of the Blitz.
It's incredible.
It's a matter of weeks before the end of the war.
And say how she was killed.
Well, it was Erev Pesach. It was the morning of the Seder night that night. My grandmother was scrubbing and cleaning when at 7:21 in the morning, out of the sky, clear blue sky, came a V-2 rocket that flattened a building called Hughes Mansions in the East End of London, very Jewish part of London. It killed 133 people, and 120 of those people were Jews. And so it was.
Your mother was 8.
And my mother was 8 years old at the time.
And does she have a memory of it?
She was not there at the time. She was one of the evacuees who was taken into the English countryside. But as an 8-year-old, she came home into London for Pesach and was sat down and told, "Your mother is dead." And that experience shaped her life, no doubt about it. It was the key experience of her life. And I think indirectly it informed my life. It had a huge impact on my life. As a result of that, my mother felt that there is no good German. Every last German is guilty for what happened there. And that was what I grew up with. And then I came across this story. And I think there is something healing about discovering that, yes, most did raise their right arm and say Heil Hitler, but some didn't.
I like that you say that it's healing, and it does kind of, again, every time we think there's no humanity, we realize there is some.
Yeah.
But I also watched an interview that you did where you cautioned an interviewer who said, look, not everybody's so bad, and you went the other way. Yes. And said, let's just be careful here. So talk about just what that tension is, particularly right now.
Yeah, I mean, it's right, you've got to hold both. And so some people want to light upon those 3 million or the 10 in this book and say, yeah, everything's great. And then others, I think, and what I will always do probably is always present the other side. If you're going too light, I'll go dark. And if you go dark, I'll go light. I think we've got to hold both. I think the reason why the question of resonance now has come up a lot. When I was writing it, people didn't feel it so strongly. But now they're reading it, I'm hearing this from a lot of people. There are some very chilling and urgent echoes in this story. And why is that? So first, to be cards on the table, I am not suggesting, and never would, that Donald Trump is Adolf Hitler. It would be facile, it would also be really insulting to the victims of Adolf Hitler. What I am saying is that it comes through very loudly and clearly here. Moves towards authoritarianism take on a similar shape whenever they happen, wherever they happen, and they recur down the decades. You don't have to go, don't need to go further than Viktor Orban's Hungary or Erdogan's Turkey to see that leaders do the same things when they want to concentrate power in their hands. They begin to weaken or hobble any institution that might act as a restraint on them. It can be the law courts, it can be the universities, it could be the media, it could be the independent government bureaucracies. They do the same thing, the playbook doesn't change. And when that happens, the dilemmas, the predicaments that those decisions impose on the people who live in those countries, they recur down the decades too. So people will read this and hear about these characters who suddenly have a decision to make. And they will think, well, that's a bit like something I've just read in the newspaper right now about law firms or about Columbia and Harvard, or you can have examples, as I say, from Budapest or Istanbul. These things recur and recur. And that's why I think there is something timely about these stories in here, and in some ways also timeless.
I don't know exactly when you have time to work on a book like this, because you are doing so much journalistically and on Unholy. Before we get to the end question of this book, I'd just like to ask about where you are right now. You're spending so much of your journalism on kind of the Jewish story and Jewish tensions and Israel in particular. None of these are easy conversations, even as an interlocutor, and you are sharing your opinion. Can you just give us a sense of just, are you sort of more alert and alive as a journalist, or are you feeling like you want to get under the covers half the time? And how did I get myself here?
Well, it's such a good question, because again, I mean, it's both. I mean, the last 2 years have been, without any question, the hardest story I've covered in my now 36-year journalistic career, without question, because it is so emotionally involving. And look, the way I see it is October the 7th itself was a huge grief-stricken, traumatic moment for the modern Jewish people. And even now, when the living hostages are back and we're still waiting for the remains of all of the dead hostages, it is still an open wound. And I simultaneously feel great anguish about the war that Israel prosecuted as a result of October 7th. The tens of thousands of Palestinian civilians and casualties and people killed there. The pain is just unending. There's pain among Jews and Israelis. There's pain among Palestinians. Too many people will close their ears to one and emphasize the other. And I'm, partly just because where I sit, partly in a way my own upbringing, I just cannot help but feel both. And the result is that has made these 2 years so difficult. Because you're either anguished by what has happened to Israel, you're anguished by what Israel is then doing, both at once. And it can be a just war that is prosecuted in some ways unjustly. These are complicated things. They're hard to explain. And I have found, especially in the social media era, people are really dividing as if they're sports fans, my team, your team. The case that says, look, this is bad and this is bad. This person is in pain and so is that person. That is harder and harder to be heard. And so it becomes exhausting.
And so what's the compass for you through that?
Well, I find myself just very often trying to stay true to what I myself believe and see, which is that, we are all made in the image of God. And an innocent life is an innocent life, and to allow myself to feel grief for both, and to be honest about that. And what it often means, and this is, it doesn't make it for an easy life. It just means you are often speaking to people to point out the thing they don't want to hear. So when I speak to a non-Jewish British audience who might read The Guardian, I might go out of my way to remind them about the horrors of October 7th, the atrocities, which can't just be glossed over, as some commentators say, the events of October the 7th. No, we have to remind people about kidnapping and rape and murder of children in front of parents and parents in front of children. Put that in front of them. And then when I speak, as I do each week on Unholy and in other places, to a Jewish audience, I will say, I know you know all of that, but are you aware of what is going on when another bomb lands on a building in Gaza? I lost my grandmother through a bomb landing on a building. I know about that. And that's a wound that doesn't close for 80 years. I'm still living with it. So each time there's another building reduced to rubble in Gaza, we have to face that too. And so each time you're telling people, look at the thing you don't want to look at. It doesn't make you hugely popular, but I think it is essential.
This book is wonderful, and I will say it really does read like a thriller, which history doesn't always. The book is called The Traitors Circle by Jonathan Freedland. Thank you for being with us on the broadcast, and thank you for everything you do. I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. Again, the book is The Traitors Circle. Pick it up, read it. It's on audiobook as well.
It is.
Are you reading it?
I am, yeah.
Oh, what a delight. You have a nice accent.
Thank you.
I'm Abigail Pogrebin for In the Spotlight. I'll see you next time.